Gilbert Charles Stuart was an American painter from Rhode Island. Gilbert Stuart is widely considered to be one of America's foremost portraitists. His best-known work, the unfinished portrait of George Washington that is sometimes referred to as the Athenaeum, was begun in 1796 and never finished. Stuart retained the portrait and used it to paint 130 copies which he sold for $100 each. The image of George Washington featured in the painting has appeared on the United States $1 bill for over a century, and on various U.S. postage stamps of the 19th century and early 20th century. Throughout his career, Gilbert Stuart produced portraits of over 1,000 people, including the first 6 presidents of the United States. His work can be found today at art museums across the United States and the United Kingdom, most notably the Metropolitan Museum of Art and Frick Collection in New York City, the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., the National Portrait Gallery, London, Worcester Art Museum in Massachusetts, and the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. Biography. Early life. Gilbert Stuart was born in Saunderstown, Rhode Island, a village of North Kingstown, on December 3, 1755, and baptized at Old Narragansett Church on April 11, 1756. He was the third child of Gilbert Stuart, a Scottish immigrant employed in the snuff-making industry, and Elizabeth Anthony Stuart, a member of a prominent landowning family from Middletown, Rhode Island. Stuart's father worked in the first colonial snuff mill in America, which was located in the basement of the family homestead. Gilbert Stuart moved to Newport, Rhode Island at the age of 6, where his father pursued work in the merchant field. In Newport, Stuart first began to show great promise as a painter. In 1770, Stuart made the acquaintance of Scottish artist Cosmo Alexander, a visitor of the colonies who made portraits of local patrons and who became a tutor to Stuart. Under the guidance of Alexander, Stuart painted the famous portrait Drive, Hunter's Spaniels, which hangs today in the Hunter House mansion in Newport, when he was 14 years old. The painting is also referred to as Dr. Hunter's Dogs by some accounts. In 1771, Stuart moved to Scotland with Alexander to finish his studies. However, Alexander died in Edinburgh 1 year later. Stuart tried to maintain a living and pursue his painting career, but to no avail, and so in 1773 he returned to Newport, England and Ireland. Stuart's prospects as a portraitist were jeopardized by the onset of the American Revolution and its social disruptions. Following the example set by John Singleton Copley, Stuart departed for England in 1775. Unsuccessful at first in pursuit of his vocation, he then became a protégé of Benjamin West, with whom he studied for the next 6 years. The relationship was a beneficial one, with Stuart exhibiting at the Royal Academy as early as 1777. By 1782 Stuart had met with success, largely due to acclaim for The Skater, a portrait of William Grant. It was Stuart's first full-length portrait and, according to the art historian Margaret C. S. Chrisman, it belied the prevailing opinion that Stuart made a tolerable likeness of a face, but as to the figure, he could not get below the 5th button. Stuart said he was suddenly lifted into fame by a single picture. At one point, the prices for his pictures were exceeded only by those of renowned English artists Joshua Reynolds and Thomas Gainsborough. Despite his many commissions, however, Stuart was habitually neglectful of finances and was in danger of being sent to debtor's prison. During this period he married Charlotte Coates. In 1787 he fled to Dublin, Ireland, where he painted and accumulated debt with equal vigor. New York and Philadelphia, leaving numerous unfinished paintings behind. Stuart ended his 18-year stay in the British Isles in 1793, returning to the United States to settle briefly in New York City. In 1795 he moved to Germantown, Pennsylvania, near Philadelphia, where he opened a studio. It was here that he would gain not only a foothold in the art world, but lasting fame with pictures of many important Americans of the day. Stuart painted George Washington in a series of iconic portraits, each of them leading in turn to a demand for copies and keeping Stuart busy and highly paid for years. The most famous and celebrated of these likenesses, known as the Athenaeum, is currently portrayed on the United States $1 bill. Stuart, along with his daughters, painted a total of 130 reproductions of the Athenaeum. However, Stuart never completed the original version. After finishing Washington's face, the artist kept the original version to make the copies. He sold up to 70 of his reproductions for a price of $100 each. But the original portrait was left unfinished at the time of Stuart's death in 1828. The painting was jointly purchased by the National Portrait Gallery and Museum of Fine Arts, Boston in 1980, and in late 2014 was on display in the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C. Another celebrated image of Washington is the Lansdowne Portrait, a large portrait with one version hanging in the East Room of the White House. During the burning of Washington by British troops in the War of 1812, this painting was saved through the intervention of First Lady Dolly Madison and Paul Jennings, one of President James Madison's slaves. 4 versions of the portrait are attributed to Stuart, and additional copies were painted by other artists for display in U.S. government buildings. In 1803, Stuart opened a studio in Washington, C. Boston, 1805 to 1828. Stuart moved to Boston in 1805, continuing in critical acclaim and financial troubles. He lived on Devonshire Street. He exhibited works locally at Doggett's Repository and Julian Hall. He was sought out for advice by other artists such as John Trumbull, Thomas Sully, Washington Allston, and John Vanderlyn. In 1824 he suffered a stroke, which left him partially paralyzed. Nevertheless, Stuart continued to paint for 2 years until his death in Boston at the age of 72. He was buried in the Old South Burial Ground of the Boston Common. As Stuart left his family deeply in debt, his wife and daughters were unable to purchase a gravesite. Stuart was therefore buried in an unmarked grave which was purchased cheaply from Benjamin Howland, a local carpenter. In an effort to provide financial aid to Stuart's family, the Boston Athenaeum held a benefit exhibition of his works in August 1828. Over 250 portraits were lent for this critically acclaimed and well-subscribed exhibition. This also marked the first public showing of Stuart's unfinished 1796 Athenaeum head portrait of Washington. When Stuart's family recovered from their financial troubles roughly 10 years later, they planned to move his body to a family cemetery in Newport, Rhode Island. However, since his family could not remember the exact location of Stuart's body, it was never moved. Legacy. By the end of his career, Gilbert Stuart had taken the likenesses of over 1,000 American political and social figures. He was praised for the vitality and naturalness of his portraits, and his subjects found his company agreeable. Speaking generally, no penance is like having one's picture done. You must sit in a constrained and unnatural position, which is a trial to the temper. But I should like to sit to Stuart from the 1st of January to the last of December, for he lets me do just what I please, and keeps me constantly amused by his conversation. John Adams Stuart was known for working without the aid of sketches, beginning directly upon the canvas. This was very unusual for the time period. His approach is suggested by the advice he gave to his pupil Matthew Harris Jewett. Never be sparing of color. Load your pictures, but keep your colors as separate as you can. No blending. 'Tis destruction to clear and be you to full effect. Stuart's works can be found today at art museums and private collections throughout the United States. and Great Britain, including the University Club in New York City, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., the National Portrait Gallery in London, and the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. A life mask of Stuart was created by John Henry Isaac Brower around 1825. In 1940, the U.S. Post Office issued a series of postage stamps called the Famous Americans Series, commemorating famous artists, authors, inventors, scientists, poets, educators and musicians, along with the artists James McNeill Whistler, Augustus St. Gaudens, Daniel Chester French and Frederick Remington. Gilbert Stuart is found on the 1-cent issue in the artists category. Today, Stuart's birthplace in Saunderstown, Rhode Island is open to the public as the Gilbert Stuart Birthplace and Museum. The museum consists of the original house Stuart was born in, with copies of paintings from throughout his career hanging throughout the house. The museum opened in 1930. Notable people painted. This is a partial list of portraits painted by Stuart. Abigail Adams, second First Lady of the United States, wife of John Adams. John Adams, second President of the United States. John Quincy Adams, sixth President of the United States. John Jacob Astor, first American multimillionaire, fur trader, art patron. John Bannister, owner of Bannister's Wharf in Newport, Rhode Island. Commodore John Barry, father of the American Navy. Anne Willing Bingham, Philadelphia socialite. Horace Binney, prominent Philadelphia lawyer. Hugh Henry Brackenridge, early American writer, Pennsylvania Supreme Court Justice, and founder of the University of Pittsburgh. Jean-Baptiste Casimir Breschard, performer and theatrical impresario. Rosalie Stier Calvert, Belgian-born heiress and mother of Charles Benedict Calvert. Mary Willing Clymer, Philadelphia socialite. John Singleton Copley, American colonial portraitist. Horatio Gates, American Revolutionary War general. King George III, King of United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, 1760 to 1820. King George IV, King of United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, 1820 to 1830. John Jay, first Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. Thomas Jefferson, third President of the United States. Rufus King, a signer of United States Constitution. Robert Kingsmill, Admiral in Royal Navy during American and French Revolutionary Wars. King Louis XVI, King of France, 1774 to 1792. James Madison, fourth President of the United States. Daniel McCormick, New York merchant and banker. Samuel Miles, Revolutionary War general, Philadelphia mayor, and America's first faithless elector. James Monroe, fifth President of the United States. Daniel Pinckney Parker, prominent Boston merchant. John Randolph of Roanoke, Virginia, congressman and senator. Joshua Reynolds, English artist. Henry Rice, Boston merchant and Massachusetts state legislator. Thomas Townshend, first Viscount Sydney, in whose honor the cities of Sydney in New South Wales, Australia and Sydney in Nova Scotia, Canada, are named, in 1785 and 1788 respectively. George Washington, first President of the United States. Martha Washington, First Lady of the United States, wife of George Washington. Benjamin West, American painter. Catherine Brass Yates, Philadelphia socialite. Portrait gallery. American artist Benjamin West, 1783–84. English artist Joshua Reynolds, 1784. American artist John Singleton Copley, 1784. American artist John Trumbull, 1818. William Bayard, 1794. Princeton University Art Museum. Horatio Gates, 1794. Peter Gansevoort, 1794. George Washington, 1795. Metropolitan Museum of Art, New York. Lansdowne Portrait of George Washington, 1797. George Washington, California, 1805, Rhode Island School of Design Museum. George Washington at Dorchester Heights, 1806, Boston Museum of Fine Arts. George Washington, 1825, Walters Art Museum. The second First Lady of the United States, Abigail Adams, 1800 to 1815. Robert R. Livingston, diplomat and founding father, 1793 to 94. John Jay, 1794, first Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. Anna Payne Cutts, sister of First Lady Dolly Madison, 1804. The White House. The fourth President of the United States, James Madison, 1804, Bowdoin College Museum of Art. Jerome Bonaparte, brother of Napoleon Bonaparte, 1804. The second President of the United States, John Adams, 1823. The third President of the United States, Thomas Jefferson, 1821, National Gallery of Art, Washington, D.C. The fourth President of the United States, James Madison, 1821. The fifth President of the United States, James Monroe. The sixth President of the United States, John Quincy Adams, 1818, son of John and Abigail Adams. The sixth First Lady of the United States, Louisa Catherine Adams c. 1821–26, daughter-in-law of John and Abigail Adams. Sir Robert Kingsmill, Admiral in Royal Navy during American and French Revolutionary Wars. United States Senator and Secretary of State Daniel Webster, 1825. George Calvert, politician and planter, 1804. Rosalie Stier Calvert, Belgian-born heiress and wife of George Calvert. Henry Rice, Boston merchant and Massachusetts state legislator, 1815. Lithograph of Little Turtle, chief of the Miami tribe, reputedly based upon a lost portrait by Gilbert Stuart. Destroyed when the British burned Washington, D.C. in 1814. John Jones of Franklin held at the Birmingham Museum of Art. George Washington Crystal Bridges Museum of American at Bentonville, Arkansas. Mrs. Harrison Gray Otis, 1809 Ronaldo House Museum of American at Winston-Salem, N.C. John Carroll, first Catholic Bishop of the United States, 1804, Georgetown University Art Collection, Washington, D.C. Stuart's art on postage stamps. Gilbert Stuart's paintings of Washington, Jefferson and others have been served as models for the engravings found on dozens of U.S. postage stamps released over the years. Washington's image from the famous Washington portrait, the Athenaeum, is probably the most noted example of Stuart's work on U.S. postage. 1861 1861 1903 1954 For other examples of Stuart's art on U.S. postage see U.S. Presidents on U.S. postage stamps. Artworks.